Now, we are on kind of our third episode, almost kind of done. Next week is the ultimate, and it is kind of the great climax to what happens here. But I don't know, how many of you have ever read kind of Mitch Albom's book? Okay, what did you think? Yeah, okay. It's therapeutic, it's comforting, the 5 people you meet in heaven. Lewis is going to talk about the people he meets in hell, okay? If you remember, and I'll come back to this again too, Mark Twain was the one who said, I go to heaven for the climate and hell for the company. But what we have found out is that the company in hell is even more boring and petty than the people you'll meet in heaven. The more a person is good, the more distinctive that person is, the more unique each one of us are. And Lewis is going to show us that in the next couple weeks. Now, we're going to see some very shady and some very poignant characters, some who may be sitting next to you, some who probably have tacos on their breath. You'll know them as you sit there with them. Okay. Whoops. Okay. Now, in his reflections on the Psalms, Lewis saw the heavens, saw that declares the glory of God, and the trees of the field would clap their hands. And for those of us who went to Ireland, we walked along the kind of the Avondale above the trees, and just the trees are alive, and this is something Lewis is showing us. But he takes this from Dante. As we've been mentioning, a lot of this comes from Dante. And we find that there's a man that he sees creeping behind a hawthorn bush. And this is a famous haunt of enchanted Irish fairies. When you see the hawthorn bush with the white kind of flowers and everything else, that's where the fairies are. But this bowler-hatted Ike, we met Ike last week, if you remember. He's the importer-exporter. He wants to bring a little bit of heaven, steal heaven, and take it down to hell and make a profit. He's someone from New Jersey coming to Virginia Beach, okay? Do you think you can bring New Jersey here? No, you can't, okay? He thinks that he could not be seen, and so there's this gate of steel-like lilies that block his progress to the great tree. Vainly, he tries to pick up this apple, but it is so heavy. And this is something Lewis is really going to emphasize. We're going to see that heaven is more real and sharper than anything we could imagine. We are just phantoms considering what we are going to experience in all of our bodily forms in our new body. And Lewis wants to show how definite this is. The apples here are too heavy, they're too full of glory, they're too large to take to hell. But Ike, kind of through great exertion, suffering, bent over, full of pain, gets one tiny little kind of green granny apple. But there is a great waterfall that is behind him, and it roars, and it tells him to put it down. Nature seeks to wake us up. This is something that when we are on our social media, we do not look around and really recognize how nature is alive and one of God's messengers to us. The noise, though gigantic, was like a giant's laughter, like the revelry of a whole college of giants laughing together, dancing, singing, roaring at their high works. Okay, let's just practice that, okay? I want you to laugh like giants, just for a second, okay? From deep within, just all together. Now, laugh. Oh, okay. No, you are huge giants, not little giants. Huge. One more time. Laugh. Okay, good. Okay. There is something about the laughter of a waterfall that is sublime. And for Lewis, waterfalls were always sublime. In his book, Experiment in Criticism, in which he was attacking another critic at Cambridge University, he was arguing that the key thing to recognize is, how is something sublime? How is something marvelous? How is something wonderful? For example, we do not really even look at each other closely enough to see the miracle of this kind of creature beside you with holes in a kind of a round head. And those holes do different things. And you have to look at each other as if you were an alien. And suddenly you become even more interesting to your spouse. Garrett? Okay. So he sees this. And the very leaves, says the waterfall, and the blades of grass in the wood will delight to teach you. Second, we see this kind of cynic in the background. He's smoking this ghostly cigarette. He's lean, hard-bitten, a cynic. He complains, it's all a game. It's all a ruse. Conspiracy theories run rampant in his imagination. He knows this is just something that the great corporation has put together. And the cynic grouses that we are taught, if you're good, you'll be happy. More studies have shown that if you are good, you will be happier than if you are bad. If you study Latin, it'll get easier. If you do study Latin, it will get easier. If married and settled down after some difficulties, you'd like it, right? Okay, roaring giant laughter, come on. Yeah, all right, okay. Married couples, I'm really worried about this. Okay, but for this cynic, everything basically is propaganda. It's bosh, tosh, everything nonsense, and a little bit of bumpkin thrown in. Even a great comedian like George Carlin distorted the truth. He is a cynic like that. And he dismissed the invisible man living in the sky who watches every bad thing you do. Religion tells you lies, he said. The invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish, where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever until it's the end of time. And he also wants your money. George Carlin, the cynic. But he's talking about the invisible man in the heavens, not the man who came from the heavens and became flesh. Suddenly we see there's something different that George Carlin didn't see. This dark philosophy, however, and if you get around cynics and skeptics, it's going to depress you. And the character Lewis is depressed as he's going along. Cynics say no to life. Teenagers say no to life. If they could be taught to say yes, suddenly life turns around. When we say yes to things, we begin to see that God has created so much goodness for us to enjoy. Almost a decade after he wrote this, Lewis caricatured some stubborn skeptics in the final Narnian chronicle called The Last Battle. And most of you remember this. Aslan gives these rebellious dwarfs an opportunity to enter a new Narnia. And there is a sumptuous feast of all of these vegetables and fruit and wines and bread set out before them. But they refuse. All they see is garbage and refuse, bones and garbage. And they say, the dwarves are for the dwarves. Aslan explains, they will not let us help them. They have chosen cunning instead of belief. Their prison is only in their minds, yet they are in that prison and so afraid of being taken in that they cannot be taken out. We all know cynics and skeptics in our life. And one of the last things we're going to do tonight is ask the question, how then do we show grace to people like this? How do we show grace to dwarves who do not want to see what is good, or to anyone else who does not want to see the beauty that is out there? So, in the book, the character Lewis has a plague of doubts. He's worried about being judged and damned, a great temptation. I think one of the most common problems that Christians have, many Christians have, is accusations against themselves. Nobody feels worthy. That is a great sign. When you don't feel worthy, then you're accepted. If you're worried about feeling worthy, you're never going to be accepted, and you're never going to accept yourself. But you accuse yourself, and we accuse ourselves of not being good enough, not doing this, not doing that, of sinning here and there. And Lewis is trying to say, listen, those kinds of self-accusations are of the devil. And what is the devil called? The accuser. And the one that accuses, the one that tries to bring us down and make us realize we're not as good as we could be. So Lewis is reflecting there, particularly on the punishment of Tantalus. You all remember Tantalus. Tantalus in Dante's Inferno and in Greek mythology is that man who sacrificed his children to feed the gods. And so they condemned him to hell, to the Inferno. And while he's there, he's in this river and up to his waist, and there's this beautiful, sumptuous fruit tree, succulent fruit, and every time he reaches for the fruit, the tree will pull away. Every time he goes to try to drink and quench his thirst, the water recedes. And so this is the kind of condition of Tantalus. And Lewis is saying, is this what heaven is like? This is what life is like. Are we all going to go through this? What if this place is, and he's listening to the cynic here, is no good? In the book of Revelation, we read the smoke of hell goes up forever in the sight of blessed saints. How do we deal with that? These are questions that he's raising that he won't get to until he meets MacDonald. So, if we're already doomed, predestined to damnation, what can one do? Lewis's own self-pity is interrupted by a very well-dressed woman, but she is worried about her own image in public. I'm not going to name names. She feels she has nothing to wear. Her closet may be filled, but she has nothing to wear. Lewis is saying thinking of oneself too much, even in the negative, and not recognizing God's grace leads to personal anguish, judgment, and torture. The angel says, "Come as you are." And she is Greta Garbo and says, "I want to be alone." That's a real old joke. Only a few of you got that because the rest of you were born this century. Okay. Oops, okay. It initially appears that the bright spirit has lost the woman because she's so concerned about her appearance. And the spirit asks, "Couldn't you, for a moment, fix your mind on something not yourself?" Then the spirit acts with sudden fanfare, blowing a horn. Better than that. Like Scottish bagpipes. Okay. Oh, he's not here. That's a dig. Okay. Sounds like that. The woods tremble with this thunderous sound of a unicorn herd. The spirit shows her the tragedy of being self-consumed, even in negative ways. However, if you remember in reading this part, startled by the thunderous herd of unicorns, she notices something outside herself. So there's an element of hope here. And to whom does she make a bolt? She runs to the bright person. She runs to the spirit. And so this woman who is so self-concerned and worried about how she looks and how she appears suddenly has not thought about herself, and she's ready to receive grace. Lewis writes in The Problem of Pain, God whispers to us in our pleasures. Think of when you feel really good. You've had a good meal. You've been with a person you really enjoy. You've got a good night's sleep. Those are God's whispers saying, I love you. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience. He comes and says, should you be doing that? Shouldn't you be doing this? What do you think? Well, are you going to weigh this? Why don't you? And there's a couple of rabbis sitting down, God and you. And you're just kind of kvetching back and forth. And he said, no, look, let me give you some other reasons for doing this. So he speaks. But he shouts to us in our pain. Pain is God's megaphone to wake up a deaf world. It is one reason why people going through tragedies and death and everything else feel so close to God. Because you're finally hearing him. The thunderous herd of unicorns has come into your presence, and you're no longer thinking of yourself. But the pivotal moment in this book occurs when Lewis meets George MacDonald. As Virgil was a guide to Dante, now MacDonald will guide Lewis in this, the Valley of the Shadow of Life. Now, George MacDonald was so significant, Lewis said, I have never written anything in which I did not quote George MacDonald. You can see him. Lewis is not original, and he says I'm not original. I have taken from so many people, Dante, Chaucer, MacDonald, and all of these people I am just translating in a new way for you. And I think the best writers do that. So Lewis is a fanboy, and when he meets MacDonald, I mean, he is just gushing over himself. It's almost very, very funny. In his autobiography, Lewis attributed his own baptism to the idea of what it means to be holy, of what goodness is, to this author. And so tongue-tied, he fawns over this saintly celebrity of the 19th century literature, a man who wrote fairy tales, historical novels, and spiritual thrillers, all of them shaping Lewis. MacDonald brings a serenity. He brings a stillness to this very nervous, anxious pilgrim. And Lewis retells him, he says, no, when I was 16 years old, I was in a railroad station. There was this kiosk. I went up to the kiosk. I wanted to find a book to read, and I found this book called Phantastes. And I took it out, and all of a sudden, it just changed my life. So he confesses to MacDonald that MacDonald is to him like Virgil and Beatrice. But MacDonald says, whoa, fanboy. He wants to save time, primarily because he's Scotch, and he doesn't want to waste any minute. The Scotch waste nothing, okay? So he, very stingy, he corrects and he mocks Lewis. No, it's not as you remember. It's not that glorious. Just let's think on what this is. But Lewis then begins to bombard him with questions. Many of the questions just tumble out of Lewis himself, questions he wrestled with throughout his literature. Is judgment not final? When is there the judgment? Does the judgment come before death or after death or both? Is there just one death or are there two deaths? And so he's beginning to ask questions that theologians since St. Augustine have been asking. So, Lewis MacDonald says, first of all, when God works through suffering, we're going to need a rearview mirror. Most of us can look at our lives and see where God providentially intervened and saved us from something that would have been disastrous, primarily another relationship. Okay, we can look at those. The rearview mirror gives us that perspective. We don't have it now for today. But once we get down the road, we look back and we see what God is doing. But Lewis will ask three sets of questions. He asks, do the ghosts really have a choice to stay here? Now, the Scottish author answers him by telling him of this medieval idea that we mentioned before of the refrigerarium, of the holiday of the damned, where the people in hell get a one-day excursion, usually on Easter, and they get to leave hell and go to New Jersey. That's not really a holiday, but we're not going to bring them to Virginia, okay? So he mentions two of Lewis's favorite authors here, Prudentius and Taylor, that we've talked about. But he says, given a choice, here's what people do. Some of the ghosts prefer to go back to earth and play tricks on poor, daft, silly women. They are called mediums, okay? And we remember Saul goes to the medium of Endor and basically tries to call one of these silly, and Samuel comes back really angry. Other literary ghosts, and if I were going to be, I'd be one of these, hang around public libraries to see if anyone is still reading their books. And then you get really depressed. And here is, I don't know if you recognize the images, it's Yeats here, William Butler Yeats and Oscar Wilde. So kind of two Irish people looking at their books on the Second Coming and on the Portrait of Dorian Gray. And just the kind of coming back to see what they wrote and how what they wrote really pointed to Christ, but they themselves went into the occult and into sensuality. So they look back and they're almost regretting what they had written. Now, answering if the ghosts can really stay in heaven, MacDonald gives us two historical figures where one enters and the other refuses. Dante allows the military general, Emperor Trajan, to be among the blessed, whose humility Pope Gregory even recognized in the fact that he stopped his military campaign to help protect a single widow. She was in desperate need, and the general stopped his whole campaign forward. This is like Jesus' invitation in Matthew 25 to take care of the widow, those in prison, those who are sick. And by doing that, he became blessed, and Pope Gregory gave him a special injunction. Now, in contrast, some of my pictures aren't coming up, I apologize. In contrast, MacDonald gives an example of another character, Sir Archibald. You all read Sir Archibald? You saw the name? That's basically what most critics think, scholars think, is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes. He wrote many books about survival, and he emphasized rational thought and deduction. What was his famous phrase? Elementary, my dear Watson. Good, our generation's coming now, okay. That was about 1917, so you're dating yourself, okay. But what happened was he became obsessed with psychic research. He went to dig out weird stories with Tibetan lamas and initiation rites in Central Africa. He wanted rational proof through the occult because he knew there was something more than reason, but he couldn't figure out what it was. What happened at the same time he was doing this, and one major kind of, this was kind of a headline from Boston to Yugoslavia, all over the place. And around 1917, he became involved as a rational detective to a zealous belief in psychic phenomena and fairies in the Cottingley hoax, a real hoax. You can go back to the newspapers. The international prank was deceptively photographed by two young cousins, Elsie and Francis, I think friends of Poppy, who hoodwinked the world with their cutout fairies. See what you could do? You could just start this whole craze and fool everybody. I think you could do it, okay? But these two girls just made their cutout pictures. They put them up. They took a photograph, early photograph. The photographs went across the world, and everybody believed in real fairies. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He was so enamored of it. But MacDonald laments about his obsession with spiritualism. If he would only have admitted that he had mistaken the means for the end and had a good laugh at himself, he could have begun all over again like a little child and entered into joy. But he would not do that. He cared nothing for joy. He just wanted to be right and in control. Throughout his life, Lewis also sought what was joy, what was called Sehnsucht. It's kind of a German word, which means longing or yearning or wanting of something. We don't know what it is, but we know there's something in our lives we hunger after, we keep looking for. When he hears this story about Archibald going to the occult, he exclaims, "Wow, how fantastic." MacDonald looks at him and reproves him. And he says, "Do you think so? It is nearer to you than you think. Because as a young atheist of 13, Lewis fell under the spell of a Miss Cowie for spiritualism. Such cravings like spiritual delight, Turkish delight, led him astray to look for the occult and even visit Yeats in a seance. And so Lewis went out as an atheist experiencing all these things. He was a rationalist, but he also, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, sought the occult. And so MacDonald is making a point here. You are not far from any of these sinners. Every single one of them you can identify with. The three little images here are an image for, if anyone's read Surprised by Joy. What are they, John? Do you know? What are these three? Remember where they come from?
Yeah, they're from the garden, weren't they?
What?
The little garden that his brother put together.
He made the little tin. His brother made a little tin of flowers and grass, and when Lewis saw it, it was so dewy and fresh, and it said, there's got to be another world. This is so wonderful. And then there's from Nutkin, Squirrel Nutkin, by Beatrix Potter, the story where he goes and his tail is cut off because he's a snappy, impudent little squirrel, and the owl grabs his tail. But when he lost his tail, it gave Lewis a sense of autumn. And autumn is the sense when some of us are nearing the end and we see the leaves fall, and you realize there's something else going on, but we were made for something more than autumn. And then the last one is from Longfellow's poem on Norse mythology, where Balder, the beautiful god, the Norse god, the good Norse god, is killed by Loki. Most of us know Loki from the Marvel series. But Loki, there was only one way to kill Balder, and that was with a kind of a poison mistletoe. And he was the one who took the poison mistletoe and killed Balder the Beautiful. And Lewis had these three images throughout his life that gave him a taste of joy. Now we're going to get to Lewis and MacDonald.
Then those people are right who say that heaven and earth and hell are only states of mind.
Hush, do not blaspheme. Hell is a state of mind. He never said a truer word. And every state of mind left to itself, every shutting up of the creature within the dungeon of its own mind is in the end hell. But heaven is not a state of mind. Heaven is reality itself.
But there is a real choice after death? My Roman Catholic friends would be surprised. For to them, souls in purgatory are already saved, and my Protestant friends would like it no better, for they'd say that the tree lies as it falls.
They're both right, maybe. Don't fash yourself with such questions. You cannot fully understand the relations of choice and time until you are beyond both. And you were not brought here to study such curiosities. What concerns you is the nature of the choice itself, and that ye can watch them make it.
Thank you. This is a major question that Lewis is kind of raising up, and it's percolating. First, there are four last things in medieval studies, and Lewis was a medievalist. There is death, judgment, hell, and heaven. And so he is asking this question, can someone come to know God after death? And his idea is, before death, that person may have never been encountered with Jesus Christ. They may have seen kind of a distorted view of Christ come through some evangelist or some other kind of weird cult and never known the true Christ. And so how is that person going to be judged? And the scriptures say that after death comes the judgment. And Lewis would think that after death, we are all coming before the great throne room, and there on the side of Christ is, side of the Father is Christ, the advocate. And he comes up and God says, "What do you believe?" And he says, "I want him for my lawyer. This is my lawyer. I believe in him. I've been looking all my life for him, but I never knew it." And if you read The Last Battle by Lewis, he has a character whose name is Emeth. And Emeth's name means truth. He's always been seeking truth, but he worships a false god. But finally, when he meets Aslan, he says, "This is what I've been looking for." And so there's the sense in which God's grace goes beyond death. Neither life, nor death, nor principalities, or powers, nothing will separate us from the love of God. And so we hope that this is not a doctrine. This is just something that Lewis is thinking out loud and helping us to think out loud. So he's not saying this is the truth. If you're a Baptist, you're going to have a hard time with that, okay? But if you're Episcopalian, all kinds of ideas go in your mind, okay? Okay, next.
Well, sir, that also needs explaining. What do they choose, these souls who go back? And how can they choose it?
Milton was right. The choice of every lost soul can be expressed in the words, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." There's always something they insist on keeping, even at the price of misery. There's always something they prefer to joy, that is, to reality. You see it easily enough in a spoiled child that would sooner miss its play and its supper than say it was sorry and be friends.
And how much are we like children? Question. Today, the dungeon of the self, the secret occult practice, involves smartphones more than Ouija boards. And Meet the Press recently explored the crisis of the lost and the lonely, the crisis of mental illness in our culture, and loneliness in discussing a recent online Rolling Stone version of A Descent into Hell. Students had a hard time giving up their smartphones. And only one participant, scholar and author Arthur Brooks of Harvard, mentioned how his Catholic faith is crucial to his life. And so people become lonely, not understanding what joy is. So Lewis asked if anything can make up for the suffering that we're going to go through. Some say there is no future bliss can make up for it, not knowing that heaven will work backwards and turn suffering into glory. God will take our sins and make them whiter than snow. It's something we will not even recognize when we get to his presence. It is just a wonderful kind of promise. And too often we deal with the judgments in the law rather than with the promises of God. And so Lewis is here. The good man's past begins to change so that his forgiven sins and his remembered sorrows take on the quality of heaven, just like the empty tomb overwhelms the cross. Both good and evil for Lewis become retrospective. Heaven works backward, and it turns even one's agonies and sufferings into glory. Looking back, one little sin can be a step towards hell. For Lewis, we move in one direction or the other every day. Every step takes us toward God and our neighbor, or away from God and our neighbor.
What about poor ghosts who never get in the bus? Can anyone who wants salvation receive it?
Everyone who wishes it does. Never fear. There are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, "Thy will be done," and those to whom God says in the end, "Thy will be done."
Okay, one more.
I willingly believe that the damned are, in one sense, successful rebels to the end, that the doors of hell are locked on the inside.
This is key. This is one of the key points for Lewis. God sends no one to hell. We choose it. We choose to be alone. It's like we've mentioned Jean-Paul Sartre in his book, No Exit, his play, remember No Exit? What is hell for him? It's Jean-Paul Sartre, Trump, and Biden. Forever, okay? It is being with the two people you hate most and living eternally with them. And so here, we're locking it from the inside and not letting God just release us from our prison. Now, if something's in red, all of you are to read it. So God does not send anyone to hell. The logical argument is simple. If heaven is to be with God and hell is to be separated from God, the choice is clear. One creates his or her own ending, as MacDonald tells the narrator, and so Lewis MacDonald encountered several examples of people who choose to go back to the gray town: the grumbler, the flirt, the teacher, the protesters, and the hellraisers. As Milton argued, they feel it better to reign in heaven than serve in hell. First comes this garrulous, nagging ghost who despises every other ghost. She gossips, she complains about her lot in life, she is unappreciated. She grumbles so much that she shall soon become a grumble, mere chaff and husk, with no real woman inside. We become what we practice. I took this picture out. I'm censored already. A most pitiful female ghost tries to seduce a bright spirit with smeared lipstick and appalling gestures of flirtation. However, he gently rebuffs her advances, and in the end she mutters, "Stupid creature," and turns back. Some ghosts arrive wanting to share their intimate knowledge of hell, even to give lectures on the Great Divorce on PowerPoint. One even brings a large, fat notebook of statistics, maths, and magic lantern. Think technology, social media, or PowerPoint again, to show notorious sinners with condescension and an arrogant superiority, accusing the spirits of living a sheltered life. Tub-thunting ghosts call for protests and for the bright spirits to shake off their religious fetters and to seize heaven for their own. They try to bring hell up into heaven. Progressive planning ghosts implore a party of happy people to dam the river, cut down the trees, kill the animals, build a mountain railway, smooth out that horrible grass and moss, and heather it with asphalt. Lewis asked if solid people are so full of love, why don't they go down into hell to rescue the ghosts? Now remember the story of Dives, the rich man, and Lazarus. He said, "Send word to my brother," and Abraham responds, "Even if someone rises from the dead, they will not believe." Again, MacDonald says that anyone who wishes or hopes for God will find him. Then, lastly, we come to two other characters. One unique character appears, which we might conjecture as the artist of prodigious talent, John Singer Sargent. When he started out as a painter, he used this wonderful, pearly, drowsy light in his early works, such as Venetian Interior. If you just notice, not just this streak of light here, but the light that he has captured here. He was so in love with light. Light just consumed him. He wanted to capture it in any way he could. And so there was this kind of beauty of his soul of looking for art and trying to capture it. However, he loved life, but he deviated to a career of portrait painting, culminating in a risque and scandalous portrait of Madame X. This has been censored too. She has a strap going down. You can look it up anytime you want, gentlemen. Okay. As a concession to the insatiable demand of wealthy patrons for portraits, Sargent dashed off hundreds of rapid charcoal portrait sketches, which he called mugs. He shockingly described himself now as a pimp for his paintings of Edwardian-era luxury. Here it is. Okay? You can see her. George MacDonald warns that every poet, and musician, and artist, but for grace, is drawn away from the love of the thing he or she tells to the love of the telling, until down in deep hell they cannot be interested in God at all, but only in what they have to say about him. For it doesn't stop at being interested in paint, you know. They sink lower. They become interested in their own personalities, and then in nothing but their own reputations. By the time Sargent finished a portrait of John D. Rockefeller in 1917, many critics began to consign him to the masters of the past, a brilliant ambassador between his patrons and posterity. To the artist concerned about fame and famous people, the solid spirit surprises him with the grand irony of his work. Okay? Women, you get to be yellow. Men, you're purple, pink. Yellow. You know what was so great about that? Is the women were in such harmony, and they sound like the Bright Spirit and the Friend. The men were and just all over the place. I just love it. You guys were the artists, damn it. Okay, good. So finally, our concluding question of this session asks now for all of us, how do we communicate with those who are self-absorbed? How do we communicate with skeptics and cynics, and with those who grumble, or even with those who feel unworthy? What might grace look like for them? And so that's the question we have before us. How do we deal with people who are cynics and skeptics? How do we deal with people who feel unworthy? What might you say?
You love them.
What?
You love them.
You love them. You show them grace. And it's going to be grace in so many different costumes and forms and styles that we keep adapting. But that love is there. The self-absorbed, you can laugh at. If you can get people to laugh at themselves, suddenly they're out of themselves. If you can get a skeptic to recognize the roots and the foundation of his or her skepticism, somehow they realize their tree will not stand. And it's just playing with them as much as arguing. No one has ever really won an argument in Scripture or in life. Arguments end. But if you tell parables, back in, 1993, we were on Court TV. The O.J. Simpson trial was on as well. I'll conclude with this story. O.J. Simpson was on, so everybody had watched the White Bronco and everything else. And their trial was on the afternoon. And I was over here at Regent University, and we had a trial going on where all of our lawyers were kind of suing Pat Robertson and George Selig and me. And so we just got on TV. And I was with the lawyers and said, Terry, just give them yes and no answers. It's all about tenure. Just say, this is tenure, this isn't. And I said, I speak in parables. I kind of talk in parables. He said, Terry, don't talk in parables. Don't tell stories. Okay, you get up on the seat, you're the witness stand, and their lawyers come after me and says, okay, now, what was tenure to you? I said, well, it was like a wooden duck. It looked like a duck, it floated like a duck, but it really wasn't a duck. And our lawyers are going, oh, that works. The commentators on Court TV came on and said, well, we understand the case finally. It was just really a wonderful thing. But here, it is parables and stories and grace that really move people into the kingdom. Jesus is always using stories and parables. Now, Paul's always talking to the church, so he can talk like Paul. But when you're talking to people outside, you tell the stories. And you share people like C.S. Lewis and others. So thank you. Good night.